we actually have a sort of programmatic strategy and research component, a strategic part of GEN that's about research, policy, and government. And what this is about is making sure that we know what we're doing and that we are evidence-based in terms of what we're actually trying to accomplish. We are very blessed that we are surrounded by a lot of very smart people who are thinking very deeply about these things. And so what we try to do is amplify that work and bring that to the field so that if you're spending any time or money or energy, we want you to spend it on the things that are most useful in affecting that result. There's a couple of things we're gonna do that Cristina is gonna lead us through. First of all, we're gonna talk about, figuring out, just as Philip said, how do we map out what's working and what's not working? And that gets to the heart of that survey I asked you to complete. But we're really trying to work out at our work at the Global Entrepreneurship Research Network, how can we bring together bigger collaborations? How can we bring the collective knowledge of the institutions that we're very deeply engaged with, like the World Bank, or like the Kauffman Foundation? I can give you 30 others who are spending, quite frankly, millions of dollars on doing research. And our mission with the Global Entrepreneurship Research Network is A, to bring you the best research and the most credible research in the world, and then also to be able to see if we can find things they can do together that's bigger than the sum of the parts. And secondly, Cristina is going to guide us through a conversation about public policy, along with Brandon Pollak. We have, as you well know, the Startup Nations Policy Network, and we're going to talk a little bit as a conversation about what that's doing. I've mentioned earlier about the fact we have a new policy hack tool, for example, and I mentioned earlier, and I want to ask you to do one thing before I leave the stage. I mentioned earlier about the ministerial. And what I really want you to do before I leave the stage is not applaud, to applaud the whole panel, but a special ovation to Cristina Fernandez. She has led this process of how do we get ministers to more intelligently engage with the support of Sir Walter. We've gone around the world and like a needle in a haystack, we've looked for who are the people in the government that really understand startups and scale-ups. And even if they're not a minister, how do we find them? And we've done, what that's really been about is how do we find intelligent engagement. And the ministerial you put together yesterday, Cristina, was just first class, so I want to give you a special thank you. It was just amazing. Knowing Cristina, she'll give all credit to the fact that the World Bank asked us if they could be our secretariat, but I'm going to give all the credit, Victor, to Cristina today. So if you don't
well deserved.
Yeah, so you did it without the United States government, and we had a lot of help from other governments and from the World Bank. So thank you very much. So Cristina, I'll turn over to you to facilitate.
Thank you, Jonathan. The ministerial is a good example of how research and policy are connected at GEN. We started gathering the startup policy advisors back in 2013-14, and there were only about 30 countries that had someone that was specifically assigned to work on startup policy matters in their governments. And that's how we found people like Mikk, for example, who's here with us today. And I'm proud to say that network has grown since, and now we have more than 50 members in the Startup Nations Policy Network. And our goal at the Startup Nations Network and its event, that it's the Startup Nations Summit every year, is to keep that community growing and allow them to have that peer-to-peer connection and learn from each other. And also, to be able to answer their questions, we partner with research institutions so that they can make more informed policies. So, Victor, can you please tell us how the World Bank sees these two worlds coming together, and with your research on tech ecosystems and connectedness, and how you're bringing that to the policy world?
Good, fantastic.
Yeah, so we work with you, with GERN, right, to try to understand what are the which tools we should develop to fill the gaps on some questions we have on supporting entrepreneurs. But the area I work with was more focused on tech startups, which is, I think, many of the interests here on the different participants. And one of the main issues we have is there wasn't too much research that gathered data at ecosystem level. Most of the knowledge was more based on specific programs or specific interventions. It was very difficult to get ecosystem level. And the data was scarce, and the research was also scarce. We tried to look about what data was public and open and try to understand, can we use something that is there? And there was, but it was incomplete. You have like Crunchbase or others that were there, but it was primarily in the US. It was difficult to find anything else. Then there were initiatives that were very interesting, like PitchBook or Startup Genome at that time, that were collecting many of the data. But specifically for the countries where the World Bank was operating, there was not such data, right? It was difficult to kind of have it harmonized. And I think it was at that time where GERN was started the initiative of mapping the startup ecosystem, and we decided, well, this is a great idea to support in gathering the data from our developing countries. And what we have done so far has been like 3 years already, I think, is to start collecting very granular data at the ecosystem level, so we can understand what are the dynamics that happen there, and understand what works or what doesn't work, right? So that we are doing to inform policy, which is one of the problems we have with policymakers. Sometimes they didn't have the data to inform that, and it was difficult then to measure, okay, what is the impact of these policies, because I didn't even have the data at the beginning. So there was very much of feeling what is going on, and it was difficult then to evaluate at an ecosystem level, what are you doing? You can do it in a program on itself. So most of the policies that were happening in entrepreneurship were kind of feeling that I think this is the right thing to do. I talk with my ecosystem and this is what they think, but there was nothing to really understand if we are doing this in a correct manner or not, right? And you can never attribute directly what you were doing. So I think that was a very good initiative in that regard, just to try to find of collaboration of different stakeholders, but also to bring developing countries in, and also bring the whole ecosystem, because I mean with GERN it's easy just to reach out to everyone and to participate in collecting this data, which takes a lot, by the way, because it's an hour survey of every founder and everything, so it was very difficult. But the good news is we have been using this to inform policy action and to inform policy programs that even amount for $50 to $100 million interventions, right? In countries like in Kenya, we are building right now one. In Egypt, we are also using it. West Bank and Gaza. So it's kind of informing more and more. And it is also allowing us to understand exactly things that we suspected worked or didn't work. And do you want me to talk a little bit about those, or do you want to leave?
Yeah, briefly, if you can give us some insights, that would be great, because that's a question we often get from our GenMDs and policy members.
That was a long introduction then for the... we managed to collect so far around 10 ecosystems, going from very mature, like New York, to very nascent, like Dar es Salaam in Tanzania, right? And in between, we have Bogota, we have Santiago de Chile, we have Beirut, Singapore. So it's kind of a good mix of different levels. And what we did is we aggregated just to control for the different ecosystems, because all of them have something different, right, in circumstances. And we try to find what is working for the early stage of startups. What works for getting the first investment, and then making those startups to be sustainable because they continue growing. So we look at the startups that would get investment in their ecosystems, and then that create employment increasingly for more than 2 years. So they continue employed, but they increase the employment, right? So that means they're making some money, because either they are getting in for funding or they are making it themselves because they are continuous. And we analyze many different factors, all the potential support programs that were there. We focus primarily on supporting programs. We look at accelerators, incubators, other kind of supporting programs. We look at other factors like business environment and other external factors that were in the ecosystem that could support. And what we found is the factor that by far has more impact, and these are preliminary results, I mean, so there might be some tweaking, but so far is where we are. The factor that by far, with a huge difference, has more impact is mentorship, but quality mentorship. That is the one that is provided by mentors that have been founders in that ecosystem before and has been successful. So, and that is critical. Once you have that, the impact is way off the charts, right? So that's the factor that's more important. Now, it's very interesting because we look at others, other support programs, and it was far, far, far below. Now, when you combine these mentors with this previous founder experience in the local ecosystem with a good quality structure accelerator program, the impact multiplies by a factor that is over 3 times, right? So that is another insight. It's not that any accelerator will do it. It has to be a very quality structure accelerator combined with this mentorship, right? When that happens, you have a very good support. And again, this is for early startups. We're not talking about the scale-ups. Now, it's interesting because when we look at other kind of support programs, like these different workshops or incubators, the impact was not there. Actually, incubators were negative because they take time, right? And there is no structure and everything. And this impact is much, much, much larger than any other intervention in the enabling environment, which is also interesting, or even the special access to finance, or constraints in general to develop the business. But again, I'm talking only at the beginning of the startup.
Thank you, Victor. So you see, you shouldn't be scared of research. There's always insights for you, for ecosystem builders, for accelerator managers, for everyone. The Global Startup Ecosystem Report by Startup Genome is another great tool that ecosystems have. Can you tell us about a few insights that our GenMDs can take from your report?
Yeah, thank you, Cristina. And it's not anymore just a Startup Genome report, but a Global Entrepreneurship Network report, because we're producing this together this year and for the years to come. So thank you very much for the support. Victor is right. I mean, the lack of data is the biggest problem in research, and that's what we attacked first, starting in 2011 with Stanford and Steve Blank, doing the largest research ever done from founders all over the world. So we've studied 55 cities, 3 years, over the last 7 years, plus 95 cities this year in depth on their subsector strengths. So the largest data set of data from founders, really not telling us their opinions, but telling us how they live the problems of the ecosystems. But the other thing that is important is that we're serial entrepreneurs. So we're serial entrepreneurs from different continents who decided to give back and help, plus experts, policy experts from Kauffman Foundation who joined us, like Dane Stengler and Arno Memorialex. So with that, now we've cracked the case on how do ecosystems develop. What are the key issues at phase 1, at phase 2, at phase 3? Because it's about doing the right thing at the right time, just like in a startup, right? You cannot do everything. When you try to do everything, you fail. Less is more. So we bring clarity and we bring focus to policy action. So key insight that we've had is really looking at these networks for the first time, quality networks with an entrepreneurial-centric community, and how they help each other, or their knowledge network really that allows them to create leading startups, really work on problems that are worth solving. And looking at sense of community. So this year we cracked the case on local connectedness, that we call. Had never been done, studying 10,000 founders and how they're related to each other globally, which we did last year, and now locally. And we realized that being connected yourself personally is very important. Even if you're in a community that's tightly knit, like Silicon Valley, where people help each other, there's a big sense of community, and we've seen that happen in Helsinki and in other places, but you individually, the startup performance will suffer if you are not connected. You can't free ride. You cannot free ride. Right? You need to be connected yourself. You need to invest time in those relationships. So mentors is one part of it, investors, but also a lot other funders. One of my startups failed because I was not connected. I'm a B2B software, enterprise software guy that did a web health B2C play because my dad died from cancer. My friend also is a serial entrepreneur as well. At a big exit, we're like, we need to help, people live this. And a year into it, I was at a conference and some guy said, you're the 3rd generation of startups that do exactly what you do, and they've all failed. I've come to this conference for 10 years. And I'm like, that was $1 million information, right? That I got a year later at Sequoia money. I had a great co-founder, and I'm like, we're going to do it. And a year into it, I'm like, I wish I knew that a year ago. And then we ran out of money and failed.
So can you tell us how many cities are in the report that we're going to launch tomorrow together with Genome?
There's 45 cities that we go in depth. We have data on 95 cities, but the report is 260 pages, so we didn't want it to be 500 pages. We're a small organization still, so
right. And if there are any other cities represented here at the GEC that want to be part of the report in future years, what are the next steps?
Come and talk to us. That's what we're here for. We're here to help you. Right? Why I got into this, I still have a startup, a VR startup, and I decided to leave my co-founders and say, we need to help. We need to help other cities catch up to Silicon Valley. And so we're here to help you and bring you clarity through data and science and experience.
Wonderful. I'll turn it over to my colleague Brandon, who's going to, through our wonderful panelists here, illustrate how important it is to engage governments as you build ecosystems. I've talked a little bit about how research informs policy, but how do we actually make that happen? I mean, when the government is usually not listening to entrepreneurs.
So thanks, Cristina, and I have the ability to kind of wear multiple hats on this front. In my previous life, you could say I'm a recovering lobbyist still. I was a political strategist, and after I was that, I hooked up with a couple other co-founders to launch 1776 in Washington, D.C., very globally focused, and I came at it from, looking at entrepreneurship and being able to say I've been an ecosystem builder and entrepreneur and not just, a political strategist, but really kind of thinking about how can you merge those two together. Now, first, Washington is a little bit of an interesting place in the sense that it's obviously the center of government in the U.S. and that it's the type of ecosystem that has not just the federal government, but all the embassies are there, the think tanks, the associations, the corporations have a footprint there. There's a lot of deep industry expertise, and so it's very unique in that sense. But as we looked at, this is a great opportunity to help government and not just government in the U.S., the federal government, but governments around the world really think strategically because they all spend time in Washington. I met with the Estonians many times, right? You had mayors, governors, members of Congress, to obviously ministers from around the world. And we really looked at it, how could we educate, not just from a local perspective, but educate policymakers in general to think strategically about taking some of the data, but also the connectivity, which is highly valuable, highly important, which will drive government to think about how they can collaborate with startups, but also how startups can actually utilize government to help in their endeavors, whether that's just through in some cases it is funding, but in a lot of times it's the connectivity, right? So one of the things I would do as someone that was kind of leading an incubator is taking that knowledge, and granted every city is different, you have to tailor it very much to what your city is like. And so really what we would think about is I would be very proactive, engaging with the embassies, engaging with the members of Congress, and bringing them to 1776 for education, and not doing the dog and pony shows that you see a lot of government officials. They would go, they like to take pictures, say, oh, I got to go to this place, this was great. Nowadays, tweet about it, put it on Facebook, whatever it might be. But it had to be very rich in substance. There had to be value that came out of those situations, and those are valuable opportunities that entrepreneurs, that people that run incubators, our MDs here can really kind of develop those kinds of tailored strategies kind of locally based on what their city does. Maybe it's sector specific, or maybe it's the center of government in your countries, and really kind of taking those proactive approaches. Because as we sit here and we sit and we had a great ministerial yesterday, it's also highly valuable for you all that are ecosystem builders to be able to talk to them and be like, this is actually what's going on. Taking the data as one point, but then being able to go to them and saying, I really want to be working with, I want to be able to scale my startup into another country, or we're trying to build our ecosystem locally and we need to get, the mayor on board or the national government. sometimes there just needs to be a lot of asking. Sometimes there just needs to be a lot of basic outreach, because sometimes, the governments are not, they're not the greatest at understanding what your needs are. So making sure that those opportunities to work together, to collaborate, and to really have these tailored settings is highly valuable, because it will drive policies that will help not only your kind of local communities, it will help entrepreneurs in general, right? That's why it's so important. That's why you see mayors engaged sometimes and we received funding ourselves from, DC city government, because there was no incubator in Washington. And there probably in a lot of your cities that you represent, there aren't necessarily incubators or accelerators or anything else. You're looking to build that. It's a center, it's a place that you can use it as that place where, government officials can ask dumb questions. You want them to ask those questions because they're a sponge. They want to be helpful. God knows I had a lot of those when I had members of Congress over who were chairs of their committees, and I was blown away about how little knowledge they had. And that's just a fact of what government has, but they want to be able to help economically. So even if you're, say, launching an incubator, you can look at it from, they have a convening power where I can help startups that maybe are working on healthcare or education or transportation, because that policymaker can make an introduction to the CEO of the hospital system or the president of the university. They can unlock a lot of opportunities that are interesting. So while we talk about specific policies, there's also a lot of actions that can come out of those engagements. So that's why I also want to talk about that connectivity piece, because governments play an integral role in making those connections for you. In addition to that aspect of, these are the policies that are going to help, whether it's around access to capital or it's talent, maybe it's local tax incentives to help startups stay. I mean, there's a lot of different components, but one of the things I want to emphasize is really kind of developing these tailored engagements, tailored strategies that are going to help the individual companies, either the members of your ecosystems or you generally. But there's a really important role for them to be playing.
Yes, and we have two great, I completely agree with you that it's something that it's necessary for ecosystem builders to do, to start reaching out to governments. Sometimes it takes several invitations, and after a year and a half, you finally get a yes, and that's how it all starts. So, for example, Mikk came to the Startup Nation Summit in Ireland, in Cork, in 2016. And then there you saw an idea of how your government can connect globally to other ecosystems around the world. Can you tell us a little bit more about what inspired that idea for your government to bring policymakers from around the world to see what you're doing in Estonia and share what they have done in their own countries? So that's the same thing with startups. You have done the same thing with a lot of founders. So.
Cristina. So why we brought the Startup Nation Summit to Tallinn last year was largely because of another political event named Brexit. So when Brexit happened, then we, as an European Union country, brought forward by 6 months our presidency in the European Union, which meant that the event of being presidency of the European Union is management service to other policymakers in the region and also globally. And then we just wanted to give it a startup-y feeling, because startups are the people and the companies that get things done. And we wanted to show that it's also possible to do that in the policy world, although it might be much more difficult because innovation cycles are longer in government. So we saw Startup Nation Summit as an opportunity to do so. It's a very good format also from the organizer's perspective, because Jen has put a lot of work into it on how to build it in a good way. So it's a very good playbook to follow, and we just put some extra elements into it to give it more of our own face, including then the format of bringing extra value to policymakers who are already willing to innovate but are looking for help. And that's how we came to the policy hack.
Yes, and I want to point out that Mikk is one of the creators of the Startup Nation's policy hack that we're now encouraging you to host in your own ecosystems. Mikk, what's unique about this hack, and how is it different from the regular concept that people, the traditional concept of hackathons that people have. How do you apply that concept to government?
Okay, so what happens at the regular hackathon is that a bunch of people come together for a weekend, they have ideas, they have knowledge, they build prototypes of new products and services, and then they either go back to their own work or then they go and build those products into something real and get to market. In government, just one weekend won't help because the innovation cycle, the budget cycle is very long. So we thought that we want to do something similar because we want government officials in the boots of the startups who are against the unknown all of the time. But we want to do it in a way that it would have real stickiness, that the things that they would be hacking would later be implemented. And we realized that in order to do that, you need to have different mini events throughout the year, leading to one hackathon, so that you could build the readiness to innovate throughout the year, then go develop the specific concept that someone wants to launch in their ecosystem, and thereafter they're ready to, much more ready to go and implement than they would after just a weekend of craziness. Yeah.
So when we were in Estonia, we brought those policy ideas. People had applied to hack them in Estonia, and we matched the policymaker that had that policy idea and that had been working already in their ecosystem to see whether it was feasible. We matched them with an entrepreneur, an investor, someone from the research community, and other policy peers, so that together they could refine it and take it back home and actually implement it. So we have, as Jonathan mentioned, we have a playbook to help you organize that in your home countries and cities, and I'll be happy to talk to you throughout the week on that. Lusapo, we have you here from South Africa, from SERA, the Small Business Enterprise Development Agency. And we want to ask you here something that we thought was very unique that we saw in South Africa, which is the ministry trying to have direct contact with entrepreneurs, for example, through 22's loan. How does your ministry ensure that you always get feedback on your programs and policies from the actual beneficiaries?
Thank you. So there's various ways. Well, the ministry works through two agencies, which is CEDA, which is where I come from as a strategist, as well as CIFA, the financing one. So on a continuous basis, we get feedback from the entrepreneurs because we've got a network of over 150 access points where they interact with our business advisors and practitioners, and they feed information back on their needs, challenges, and that all the way up, and also some possible solutions. But I think 22's Loan is a platform where even get people at a startup stage where they can come in and look at what obstacles they face as entrepreneurs trying to start their businesses. Because most of the ones that would come to us as agencies are most probably wanting to scale up or just expand their business. So I think 22's Loan gives you this platform where you can get entrepreneurs at all stages of business to come and give what the challenges are, but also able to bring in from time to time, you can bring in ecosystem partners, or you can bring in universities, research institutions to interact with the guys that are housed at 22's Loan to get ideas from them. And on a continuous basis, this information gets fed up to the ministry. And also we, looking at what we used to do in the past, what another old department was trade and industry, we used to have this national review of small business in the country, which you got and extensively interview SMEs and get a sense of what the challenge is and all of that, and this would hopefully feed into policy. So there's some that was discontinued a couple of years because of budgetary constraints and moving to a new department. But we're seeing that coming through now, because I think one thing that department has realized is in the absence of using evidence to inform your programs and policies, it sort of becomes noise and ability to influence. So the people that make the most noise actually put their position as a fact, and now you design programs around that noise, only to realize a couple of years down the line that this is actually not the appropriate instrument I should have designed. But because you're not really interacting with small businesses, more interacting with your influential guys, you might miss what the real challenges are. So the agents are a huge vehicle for them to get information on a continuous basis. But Sloan is a test case, so you can even get other ecosystem partners to interact with small businesses and see what solutions they can come up from.
Wonderful. I think that's a great story. Now I encourage you to connect with Lusapo over the next few days to talk about that design process that he just mentioned. We also will have a couple sessions labeled on the program as Startup Nations Policy Dialogues on FinTech, on using the Lean Public Policy Canvas, and other sessions to help you design policies, propose policies to your government, and engage them. Thank you.